according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out. And there, ahead of them, went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. This is the gospel of our Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Well, the Christmas carols have been sung, although I think we might have one more today. At home, our Christmas trees and decorations are starting to come down, if they haven't already. Families scattered back to wherever they came from. Students and teachers are back to school. The holiday sales and commercials are mostly over. The Christmas leftovers are a distant memory. Our casual greetings have gone from "Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays" to "Happy New Year," and now back to just regular old "Hi, how are yas?" And in our worshiping lives, we are settling into the season of Epiphany. Our Christmas trees are gone, the poinsettias are for the taking out in our narthex. They're not filling up our altar. And we're entering into this season of Epiphany, ordinary, mundane Epiphany. Of course, it can't live up to the hype of Christmas. In comparison to Advent and Christmas, with all the extra candles and flowers and trees, this season in which we celebrate Christ's revelation to the Magi and to the world, just seems so plain, so lackluster, dare I say, boring. Then again, there is nothing boring about the season we all find ourselves in currently. My spouse Micah and I have spent the last 3 weeks going round after round with colds and sinus infections, and it all came to a head on New Year's Eve. We were both feeling pretty crummy, and we knew we weren't going to make it to midnight, so at around 10 p.m., we decided to go to bed. And knowing that there might be a few midnight fireworks in our neighborhood, we afforded our dog Henry the rare luxury of sleeping in our bed with us so that he wouldn't be too frightened. But not long after we drifted off, chaos seemed to descend on our sleepy home. Both Micah and I spiked fevers in our sleep. Soon we were both tossing and turning and kicking in bed, trying to remove the layers of blankets that had seemed so cozy when we went to sleep, but were now causing us to be drenched in sweat. Micah was shivering so hard that his teeth were chattering loudly, and I was drifting in and out of consciousness with the weirdest fever dreams. You know, those kind of dreams where you're not sure what's real and what isn't. I was unsure of whether or not the pops and bangs I was hearing were fireworks outside or figments of an imaginary war zone in my feverish dream state. Our poor dog kept getting jostled out of his sleep by our shifting and coughing and complaining, and it felt like the longest and strangest night we had ever had. Happy New Year. In some ways, I think this new year and this new season of Epiphany are not entirely unlike a night of fitful sleep and fever dreams. Suddenly, it feels like time is moving at lightning speed when just days ago we had been in that strange state between Christmas and New Year where time and space don't really exist. Things feel a bit chaotic and uncertain to us as we return to routines that feel a little difficult to get back into the swing of. The new year brings with it the fact that time has not stopped, and we realize that we've got new deductibles to meet, new semesters to begin, and somehow tax season is way too close for comfort. We're shifting and settling into 2020, trying desperately to get comfortable in it, kicking off the things we'd like to let go of from the past year, and sharing our hopes and fears and resolutions for the year to come. And we're confronted with news that we perhaps wish was a figment of our imagination rather than the reality of our world. The threat of war and unrest in the Middle East, rampant wildfires that are destroying much of Australia at this moment, and the realization that we have somehow already found ourselves in another presidential election year and preparing ourselves for all that that will entail. As much as we might wish we were back in the season of Christmas, I think it's safe to say that there is certainly nothing ordinary or boring about this new season of Epiphany. And we are not the only ones to experience the season of Epiphany as a little chaotic and uncertain. More than 2,000 years ago in the city of Jerusalem, a group of astronomers, of all people, mystics who studied the stars, some call them three kings or tres reyes or wise men or magi, they approached the Roman king of Judea, King Herod. These magi had come from the east. In fact, and perhaps ironically so, many historians believe that they came from the region that is now modern-day Iran. And they brought with them beautiful and treasured gifts. They had traveled in a giant caravan all the way to Jerusalem because there had been a literal shift in their universe. A star had arisen, and it signified to them that something big was coming into the world. And so, uncertain of all the details of who or what they might find, aside from what was told through the prophets, they faithfully followed the stars all the way to Jerusalem, basically to King Herod's doorstep, where they asked, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and we have come to worship him." But these men from the east, these star chasers, these non-Jewish, non-Roman foreigners who are coming to ask the king of Judea where they might find the newborn king of the Jews, well, those were not the kind of visitors bearing the kind of message that King Herod really wanted to hear. When King Herod heard this, our text says, he was frightened, and all of Jerusalem was frightened with him. The first account of the Epiphany, the first account of Jesus the Messiah being revealed to the wider world, was anything but ordinary or boring. That first season of Epiphany was one of fear and uncertainty and chaos. And in the midst of the fear and the uncertainty, in the midst of what probably felt like an awful fever dream to King Herod, Jesus is revealed to the world. The Magi find Jesus and fall to their knees in awe and wonder and worship. They present their gifts to this holy family. And after being warned in a dream not to return to King Herod, who was planning to kill Jesus, they return home by an entirely different and unfamiliar road. In our Epiphany story today, we hear about a world not unlike our own. A world in which many are overcome by fear. A world in which the future feels unknown and certain. A world in which we receive mixed messages from powers and principalities. A world in which we might feel compelled by the very stars of the universe to take paths that we hadn't originally planned on taking. And into this world, Christ is born. Into this world, Christ continues to reveal himself to us. Our Savior is no stranger to human fear or uncertainty or chaos. But Christ's presence in our chaotic world does present us with a choice about how we respond to fear and uncertainty in our midst. King Herod and the Magi take very different approaches to the fear and uncertainty that they face. The Magi, while guided by prophecy and the stars that they have studied their whole lives, still don't know exactly what they will encounter when they go to Jerusalem and then to Bethlehem. It's why they go knocking on Jerusalem's door asking for directions. They still don't fully understand what is in store. And still, they travel with open hearts and open minds. They trust in the guidance of the stars, and they bring with them the most precious gifts they have to offer. When they finally do encounter Jesus, they worship him, and they present their gifts. They worship a God who is revealed to Jews and Gentiles alike. A God who is revealed to those who study the Torah and to those who study the stars. They worship a God who in that moment widened the tent, expanding what it means to be children of God. And then, rather than returning home by the same path that brought them, they take a different road, a less familiar road, a riskier road, for the sake and protection of a child who is vulnerable. In spite of all the uncertainty before them, the Magi keep their hearts open and step out in faith into the unknown. King Herod, on the other hand, has a different way of dealing with fear and uncertainty. As soon as he hears the prophecy about the newborn king of the Jews, he feels his own power and authority threatened. In his fear and fragility, he manipulates the Magi, telling them, "Send word once you've found the child so that I too can worship him." Of course, his intention is not to worship, but to destroy. As we learn in the following verses of this text, and we talked about last week, Herod will turn to unmitigated violence to deal with his fear, killing all male newborns under the age of 2 in the region. For Herod, the way to deal with fear and uncertainty is to hold ever tighter to everything in his control, lashing out in violence and fury with little regard for the consequences. Our own Epiphany season here in 2020, of course, looks different in many ways from the time of Herod and the Magi. But it is nonetheless filled with its own modern fears and uncertainties and chaos. War and violence, a climate in crisis, political turmoil and chaos in our nation. And Christ is revealing himself to us now, just as he did then, bearing hope in the midst of chaos, peace in the midst of violence and fear, and love in the midst of every circumstance. We, of course, face our own choices in this season. When we encounter fear or uncertainty, we may be tempted to cling tightly to what we feel like is ours. It's tempting to lead from our fears rather than leading from our hopes. It is tempting to lead from a place of anger or cynicism, or to believe that violence and warfare are our only logical options if we hope to preserve our place in the world. But in this and every season, Christ is calling us to another way. Christ calls us to hope in the midst of fear, peace in the midst of violence. Christ calls us to trust in the guidance of the Holy Spirit in the same way the Magi trusted and were guided by the stars. Christ calls us to open our hearts and our minds to see the innumerable and wild ways that God is breaking into this troubled world. Christ calls us to make room for awe and wonder and worship, even in the times and places where we would least expect to find it. Christ calls us to take the road less traveled by, especially when it means that we might protect those who are vulnerable. And Christ calls us to ready and arm ourselves, not with weaponry, but with the gifts that we all bring. The gifts that we were all born with. Christ calls you to bring the gift of your very self, your strength, your unique quirks and personality and idiosyncrasies, your God-given talent and intellect and humor and skill and beloved identity. Christ calls you to bring the gift and fullness of your beautiful being and to join him in the midst of chaos. And perhaps when our hearts and minds are open, when we make room for hope in this weary world, when we bring the fullness of who we are as our humble offering, perhaps it is then that Christ is revealed most clearly to us. Yes, Christmas is over, but Epiphany is not a boring runner-up by any means. Epiphany, this season we are in right now, this is where Christ's presence in the world truly begins to bear fruit. This is the season where we step out boldly in faith with the promise that God is with us. In this new season and in this new year, be of good courage. God has given you hearts and minds that are open. God has given you the many and wonderful gifts you have to offer this world. And God has given you God's very self, Emmanuel, to guide you through this and every season, come what may. Thanks be to God. Amen.